My sister kissed my fiancé at her own engagement party, so I nuked her wedding from orbit starting with her honeymoon. My sister Haley is 26 and getting married next month. I'm 29, been with Ryan for 5 years, engaged for 2. Haley's always been the wild one. Party girl in college, barely graduated, now works retail but acts like she runs the place. Her fiancé, Keith, is a wannabe entrepreneur, sells supplements online, makes maybe $1,000 a month. They got engaged last year after dating for 6 months. Our parents were thrilled, kept saying Haley was finally settling down. 3 months ago, Haley called me crying. They couldn't afford a honeymoon. Keith's business was slow. Her retail job barely covered her car payment. She wanted something special, had her heart set on this resort in Turks and Caicos she saw on Instagram. I felt bad. Told her I'd help. Booked them 7 nights at an all-inclusive resort, $8,400 on my credit card. Made the reservation under her name but kept all the confirmation emails. Told her it was an early wedding gift, to keep it between us because Ryan and I were saving for our own wedding next year. She cried, said I was the best sister ever. 2 weeks ago was Haley's engagement party. Big backyard thing at our parents' house, maybe 60 people. Haley was drunk by 8 p.m., which was normal. Keith was inside showing his uncle a business opportunity. I went to the bathroom, came back outside, and couldn't find Ryan. My cousin pointed toward the garage. I walked around the side of the house. Haley had Ryan pressed against the wall, her mouth on his, hands in his hair. He was frozen, arms at his sides. I watched for maybe 3 seconds, long enough to see him push her away, say, "What the hell, Haley?" She laughed, grabbed his face again. That's when she saw me. Ryan immediately came toward me, started explaining. Haley stumbled over, giggly, and touched my arm. "Don't be such a prude, Becca. It was just a kiss. We're all family here." Ryan and I left immediately. He was mortified, kept apologizing even though he didn't do anything wrong. The next morning, Haley texted me. "Super sorry about last night. Was so drunk. Barely remember anything. You know how I get. Can we move past this?" I replied sure, no problem. Then I called the resort. Explained I needed to cancel a reservation. They said it was non-refundable at this point, only 3 weeks out. I said I understood, but I was the one who paid, and I wanted the reservation officially canceled regardless. They processed it. Sent me confirmation that the booking was void. I didn't tell Haley. Last week she texted me about the airport shuttle timing. Told her she should probably double-check her reservation. She laughed, said I was such a worrier. 4 days ago, Keith called me. The resort says their reservation doesn't exist. Haley's freaking out. The confirmation number she had wasn't pulling anything up. I played confused. That's weird. Maybe call them again? He called back an hour later. They said it was canceled by the purchaser 2 weeks ago. Was that you? I mean, yes, I paid for it originally. I decided to cancel after the engagement party. You know, when Haley kissed Ryan? Surely she told you about that. Silence. Then, she kissed your fiancé? Wow, Keith, you didn't know? She was pretty drunk, but she definitely remembered the next morning when she texted me about it. Maybe ask her? He hung up. The explosion was immediate. Haley called screaming that I ruined her relationship. Keith was threatening to call off the wedding. Their honeymoon was gone. How could I do this over one drunken mistake? I kept my voice calm. Haley, you sexually assaulted my fiancé at your engagement party, then told me to get over it. I don't owe you a vacation, but you said it was a gift. Gifts are for people who respect boundaries. You crossed a massive one, but it was nothing. I was drunk. If it was nothing, why is Keith so upset about it? You told him it was nothing, right? She started sobbing. Our parents got involved next. Mom called, said I was being petty, that I was destroying Haley's wedding over silly drunk behavior. I asked if she thought it would be silly if Keith's brother had pinned me against a wall and kissed me while I tried to get away. Would that be funny drunk behavior? Mom said that was different. I said, explain how. She couldn't. Yesterday, Keith came to my apartment alone. 2 nights later, Ryan and I were eating dinner when my phone exploded with texts. Screenshots of Haley's Facebook post. A long, dramatic paragraph about being attacked at her own engagement party by someone she trusted. And the final sentence made my blood run cold. She was suing my fiancé for assault. The doorbell rang 20 minutes later. I looked through the peephole and saw Keith standing there, his shoulders slumped, dark circles under his eyes. I opened the door and he asked if we could talk privately. Ryan was in the kitchen and I told him Keith was here, then led Keith to the living room. He sat on the couch and rubbed his face with both hands. He told me he'd been up all night thinking about everything, trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't. Haley admitted the kiss happened, he said, but she claimed Ryan had been flirting with her all night and led her on. My stomach twisted. I pulled out my phone without saying anything and found the text Haley sent me the morning after the party. I handed the phone to Keith and watched his face as he read it. The text said she was super sorry, that she was drunk and barely remembered anything, asking if we could move past it. Keith's jaw clenched and he asked if he could screenshot it. I nodded and he pulled out his own phone, took the picture, then handed mine back. He looked at me and asked what I actually saw that night. I told him the truth, keeping my voice steady. Haley had Ryan pressed against the garage wall with her mouth on his and her hands in his hair. Ryan's arms were at his sides, frozen. He pushed her away the second he snapped out of it and told her what the hell. She laughed and grabbed his face again. Keith closed his eyes and nodded slowly. He stood up and thanked me for being honest with him. He said he needed time to figure out what to do about the wedding. As he walked toward the door, he stopped and mentioned that Haley's Facebook post was still up. It was getting dozens of comments from people who didn't know the real story, people calling Ryan awful things. Keith left, and I went straight to the kitchen where Ryan was sitting at the table staring at his phone. We spent the next hour taking screenshots of everything. The post itself, every single comment, the shares, all of it. My phone buzzed with a call from Cassie and I answered. She was freaking out because she'd just seen the post and knew it was a complete lie. I told her we were documenting everything and she said good, that this was serious and we needed to protect ourselves. After we hung up, I searched online for family lawyers and found the name Cassie had mentioned before, Nora Fletcher. I called her office and explained the situation to the receptionist, who put me through to Nora directly. Nora listened to everything and told me that Haley's public accusation could be defamation. She said we should document everything in case we needed to take legal action. I told her we were already screenshotting the post and she said that was smart. She advised us to write detailed statements about what actually happened at the party, while our memories were still fresh. She wanted us to get it all down in writing with specific times and details. Ryan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and started typing his account. I did the same on my phone, describing exactly what I saw when I walked around the side of the house. Ryan texted Jason and asked if he'd be willing to write a statement too, since he'd been at the party and saw Haley stumbling around drunk before everything happened. Jason said yes immediately and asked what he needed to include. That evening, my phone rang and Dad's name appeared on the screen. I answered and his voice sounded careful, like he was picking each word. He said Mom was mad at me for humiliating Haley, but he admitted he was troubled by the assault accusation. He knew I wouldn't lie about something that serious. I felt a tiny bit of relief that at least one parent believed me. Dad asked if Ryan would be willing to meet with him and Mom together to talk through what happened. I told him only if Haley's Facebook post came down first. I wasn't sitting down for a family conversation while she was publicly calling Ryan a predator. Dad was quiet for a moment, then said he'd talk to her about it. 2 days passed and my phone stayed silent from my parents, but Haley's Facebook post kept spreading. Someone shared it in a local community group called Neighborhood Watch, and suddenly people I barely knew started messaging me. A woman from the gym asked if everything was okay with my relationship. An old high school friend sent a private message asking if Ryan really did what Haley said. My former coworker texted asking if I needed help getting away from an abusive situation. Each message felt like a punch to the stomach because these people actually believed Ryan was dangerous. I showed each one to Ryan and watched his face get paler with every screenshot. He stopped going to the gym, started working from home instead of the office. I called Nora and told her the post was destroying Ryan's reputation in real time. She asked if I had screenshots of all the shares and comments. I sent her everything. She reviewed it all and called me back within an hour. She said this was serious defamation, and we had grounds for legal action. She'd draft a cease and desist letter immediately and send it certified mail to Haley. The letter would demand Haley remove the false accusation and post a public retraction within 48 hours, or we'd pursue defamation charges. I asked what happened if Haley ignored it. Nora said then we'd file a lawsuit and she'd have to defend her lies in court with actual evidence, which she didn't have. 2 days later, the certified mail tracking showed Haley signed for the letter at 10:47 a.m. My phone rang at 11:15 a.m. Haley's name flashed on the screen and I put it on speaker so Ryan could hear. Her voice came through screaming before I even said hello. She called me every name she could think of and said I was trying to destroy her life with lawyers and legal threats over one stupid mistake. I kept my voice flat and calm. I told her she destroyed her own life when she lied about being assaulted. I said all she had to do was tell the truth and remove the post. She screamed that I was being dramatic and vindictive. I said she had 48 hours to comply with the letter or we'd see her in court. She said I was a horrible sister and Keith was right to call me cold and calculated. I asked when she talked to Keith. She went quiet for 3 seconds, then hung up. I looked at Ryan, and he looked back at me with his eyebrows raised. 6 hours later, I was making dinner when my phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had commented on Haley's post asking for an update. I clicked through and the post was gone. Completely deleted. I checked her profile and scrolled through everything, but there was no retraction or clarification anywhere. Just the post vanishing like it never existed. But everyone who saw the original accusation still had it in their minds. The shares were still out there in other groups with Haley's words calling Ryan dangerous. I texted Nora and told her the post disappeared, but Haley didn't post any correction. Nora replied that deletion was good but insufficient. She'd send a follow-up letter demanding the public retraction. The next afternoon, someone knocked on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw Keith standing there looking worse than last time. His hair was messy and he had dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. I opened the door and he asked if he could come in. We sat in the living room and he stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. He told me he called off the wedding. I felt my chest get tight with a weird mix of relief and guilt. He said he couldn't marry someone who lies this easily and refuses to take responsibility for hurting people. He said Haley spent 3 days crying and begging him to reconsider, but every time he asked her to just tell the truth about what happened, she'd get defensive and turn it around on me. He said he finally realized this was who she was, and it wouldn't change after marriage. I asked where Haley was staying now. He said she moved back in with our parents the day after he called off the wedding. He said she was telling everyone that I destroyed her relationship and her wedding out of jealousy and spite. He said our mom was backing up that version and Dad was staying quiet. I felt the guilt wash away and get replaced with anger. Keith stood up to leave and thanked me for being honest with him from the start. He said he wished Haley had been half as truthful. After he left, I checked my phone and saw a missed call from Mom. There was a voicemail. I sat on the couch and hit play. Mom's voice came through cold and sharp. She said she couldn't believe what I'd done to my own sister. She said I'd always been jealous of Haley's free spirit and fun personality. She said I was vindictive and cold and calculating. She said I used one drunken mistake to destroy Haley's entire future. She said Haley was heartbroken and humiliated and it was all my fault. She said she was ashamed to call me her daughter right now. The voicemail ended and I sat there staring at my phone. Ryan came out of the bedroom and found me sitting frozen on the couch. He sat next to me and asked what was wrong. I played him the voicemail. He listened to the whole thing and then pulled me against his chest. I started crying and couldn't stop. He held me while I broke down completely. He said we could let this go if it was too hard. He said he didn't need an apology or vindication from anyone. I pulled back and looked at him. I told him this wasn't just about the kiss anymore. I said Haley tried to destroy his reputation with lies, and I wasn't going to let that stand. I said if we let it go now, she'd know she could do whatever she wanted without real consequences. Ryan nodded and kissed my forehead. An hour later, Cassie showed up at my door with 2 bottles of wine and Chinese takeout. She said she figured I needed both. We sat on the floor of my living room eating lo mein straight from the containers while I told her everything that happened. She listened to Mom's voicemail and her face got hard. She said this was a pattern with Haley. She said Haley does something wrong, faces a consequence, then plays victim until everyone feels sorry for her and forgets the original problem. She said it worked because people like Mom enabled it, and people like me smoothed everything over to keep the peace. I realized Cassie was completely right. I thought about every time Haley got drunk and did something embarrassing and I made excuses for her. Every time she borrowed money and didn't pay it back and I just let it go. Every time she hurt someone's feelings and I convinced them she didn't mean it. I'd spent my whole life making Haley's messes disappear so she never had to face real consequences. The honeymoon cancellation was the first time I ever held her accountable for crossing a line. And instead of apologizing, she escalated to false accusations, because she'd never learned that actions have consequences. Cassie left around midnight and I went to bed feeling more clear about everything than I had in weeks. The next morning, Nora called while I was making coffee. She said taking down the post was good, but not enough because everyone who saw the original accusation still thought Ryan attacked Haley. She recommended sending another letter demanding a public statement within 7 days explaining what really happened, or we'd file a defamation lawsuit. I told her to draft it and send it over for review. Ryan came into the kitchen and I filled him in while pouring his coffee. He nodded and said whatever I thought was best. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. Dad this time. His voice sounded worn out and sad in a way I'd never heard before. He asked if we could meet with a family counselor he found who does mediation work. He said things had gotten completely out of control and the family was falling apart. He said Mom wouldn't speak to me. Haley was a wreck living in their guest room, and he felt stuck in the middle watching his daughters destroy each other. I felt a twist of guilt, but pushed it down. I told him I'd consider mediation, but only if Haley posted a real explanation first, not just deleted the lie. Dad was quiet for a long moment, then said he'd talk to her. I heard Mom's voice sharp in the background, demanding to know what I wanted now. Dad told her to give him a minute. He came back on and said he'd call me in a few days after he talked to Haley. 3 days went by with nothing. I checked Haley's Facebook obsessively, but there was no new post. On the 4th day, I woke up to a notification. Haley had posted something at 6 a.m. I opened it with my heart pounding. The post said there had been a misunderstanding about what happened at her engagement party. She said she'd been very drunk and her memories of that night were unclear. She said she regretted any confusion or hurt feelings. It wasn't an apology, and it definitely didn't admit she lied about Ryan attacking her, but it was something. I screenshot it and sent it to Nora. She called back within an hour and said it was weak, but technically met the minimum requirement for us to proceed with mediation. Dad called that afternoon and gave me the address for the counselor's office. The appointment was set for the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. I told him Ryan and I would be there. I also told him Nora would be coming as our advocate. Dad sighed but didn't argue. Tuesday arrived and Ryan took the afternoon off work. We drove to the counselor's office in a professional building near the courthouse. The waiting room had generic landscape paintings and uncomfortable chairs. Nora met us there looking sharp in a blazer with a leather folder under her arm. At exactly 4 p.m., A woman in her 50s came out and introduced herself as the mediator. She led us into a conference room with a long table. Haley was already sitting there with Mom and Dad on either side of her. Haley's eyes were red and puffy, but her jaw was set in that stubborn way she gets. Mom wouldn't look at me. Dad gave me a tired nod. Ryan and I sat across from them with Nora between us. The mediator explained the ground rules. That everyone would get a chance to speak without interruption. The goal was understanding, not winning. We were here to find a path forward as a family. She asked who wanted to start. Haley's hand went up immediately. The mediator gestured for her to go ahead. Haley's voice shook as she talked. She said she'd been drinking at her party and got overly affectionate with Ryan. She said it was just playful, sisterly teasing and she never meant anything by it. She said I saw them talking and completely overreacted. She said I'd always been jealous of her relationship with Ryan because he was fun and relaxed around her in a way he wasn't with me. She said canceling the honeymoon was cruel and vindictive, done purely out of spite to ruin her wedding. She said she posted on Facebook because she was hurt and confused about why I would destroy something so important to her over nothing. Her voice broke on the last word, and Mom reached over to squeeze her hand. I kept my face completely neutral, even though rage was building in my chest. The mediator thanked Haley and turned to me. I took a breath and kept my voice calm and factual. I said I went looking for Ryan at the party and found Haley with him pinned against the garage wall. I said her mouth was on his and her hands were in his hair. I said Ryan's arms were at his sides and he was frozen. I said I watched him push her away and say what the hell. I said Haley laughed and grabbed his face to kiss him again. I said when she saw me she told me not to be a prude because it was just a kiss and we were all family. I said the next morning she texted me an apology saying she was super sorry and barely remembered what happened because she was so drunk. I said she asked if we could move past it. I pulled out my phone and showed the mediator the screenshot of that text. I said I canceled the honeymoon because I wasn't going to reward someone who sexually assaulted my partner and then told me to get over it. Mom made a small noise, but the mediator held up a hand. The mediator asked Ryan if he wanted to add anything. Ryan's voice came out rough and unsteady. He said Haley grabbed him when he was alone and he didn't know how to react. He said he felt trapped and scared and violated. He said he pushed her away as soon as his brain caught up to what was happening. He said having her post that he attacked her made him feel sick because he was the victim, and she turned it around on him. He said he couldn't sleep for days after that post went up, because he kept thinking about what would happen if people believed her lies. He said his reputation and his job and his entire life could have been destroyed. His hands were shaking on the table. Mom shifted in her seat and looked down. The mediator let the silence sit for a moment, then turned to Haley. She asked directly if Haley remembered sending me that apology text. Haley's face went bright red. She nodded slowly. The mediator asked her to explain what she meant in that text. Haley said she sent it because she thought I was making a big deal out of nothing, and she wanted to smooth things over. She said she didn't actually think she did anything wrong, but she knew I was upset. The mediator asked if that was an honest apology then. Haley didn't answer. Dad spoke for the first time since we sat down. His voice was flat and disappointed. He said he was ashamed that Haley had lied about the assault accusation. He said canceling a vacation might seem harsh, but it was a reasonable consequence for crossing someone's boundaries the way she did. He said lying about being assaulted was serious and wrong and he couldn't defend it. Mom shifted in her seat and her voice came out shaky but firm. She said Haley was drunk and scared and didn't mean for things to spiral this way. She said we needed to understand that Haley made a mistake, but she was terrified when everything blew up and she didn't know how to handle it. The mediator let Mom finish, then turned to her with a calm expression. She said she understood that being drunk can impair judgment, but it doesn't excuse sexual assault or making false accusations. She said those are serious actions with real consequences regardless of someone's state of mind when they made those choices. Mom's face went red and she looked down at her hands. The mediator turned back to Haley and asked what she thought would be fair to repair the harm she caused. Haley lifted her head and her voice came out defensive. She said she already took down the Facebook post and she didn't know what else I wanted from her. She said she apologized and removed the accusation, and she couldn't take back what happened at the party. The mediator nodded and looked at me. I took a breath and kept my voice steady. I said I wanted a real apology to both me and Ryan, not just a vague statement about misunderstandings. I said I wanted her to acknowledge that she crossed a serious line when she forced herself on Ryan, and then lied about it. I said I wanted a commitment to stop playing victim every time she faced consequences for her actions. Haley stared at the floor and didn't respond. The silence stretched out for maybe 30 seconds. Mom reached over to touch Haley's arm, but Haley pulled away. The mediator suggested we take a short break and pointed toward the hallway. Ryan and I stood up and walked out together. He squeezed my hand as we headed toward the water fountain at the end of the hall. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it out to see a text from Keith. He said Haley called him during the break crying and begging him to take her back. He said she promised she would change and go to therapy and do whatever it took. He said he was done believing her promises without seeing actual changed behavior first. I showed Ryan the text and he nodded slowly. We stood there for another few minutes just breathing and trying to stay calm. When we walked back into the room, everyone was already seated again. The mediator waited for us to sit, then folded her hands on the table. She said based on what she heard today, she recommended we take a month apart with no contact, while everyone processed what was discussed. She turned to Haley and said she strongly recommended Haley attend counseling to work on accountability and impulse control. Haley's face went bright red and her voice came out loud and sharp. She said she wasn't the crazy one who needed therapy. She said I was the one with control issues who destroyed her wedding over nothing. She said the mediator was taking my side because I seemed calm and reasonable, but really I was vindictive and cruel. Mom tried to reach for Haley's arm again and started saying her name in a soothing voice. Dad's jaw clenched and he looked more frustrated than I'd ever seen him. He told Haley to stop talking and listen for once in her life. Haley stood up fast and her chair scraped against the floor. She grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. Mom called after her, but Haley kept going. We heard the main door slam a few seconds later. The mediator didn't look surprised. She pulled out some papers from a folder and passed them around the table. She said these were worksheets about healthy boundaries and family conflict. She said we should all take time to review them even if we didn't meet again as a group. Mom gathered her papers and her purse without making eye contact with anyone. She left the room without saying goodbye. Dad stayed in his seat looking tired and defeated. Ryan and I started gathering our things. As we headed toward the door, Dad stood up and touched my elbow. He asked if he could talk to me for a second. Ryan nodded and said he'd wait in the car. Dad and I stood in the hallway near the exit. He said he was sorry for not believing me sooner. He said he should have listened when I first told them what happened instead of assuming I was overreacting. He said watching Haley lie so easily during the mediation made him realize this was a pattern he'd been ignoring for years. I told him I appreciated that. He hugged me quickly, then walked back toward the parking lot. Over the next 2 weeks, Dad started texting me separately from Mom. The first text came 3 days after the mediation. He said he'd been thinking about how differently they treated me and Haley growing up. He said they always expected me to be responsible and mature, while they excused Haley's behavior as youthful fun. He said he realized that wasn't fair to either of us, because it taught Haley she didn't have to face consequences, and it taught me that my feelings didn't matter as much as keeping the peace. I texted back thanking him for recognizing that. He sent another text a few days later saying he and Mom were having a hard time talking about everything. He said Mom felt attacked and defensive while he felt like they failed as parents by enabling Haley for so long. He said they were trying to work through it, but it was difficult. I replied that I understood, and that I hoped they could figure things out. Mom sent me a long email 9 days after the mediation. The subject line said, "I'm sorry," and I opened it hoping for a real apology. The first 2 paragraphs were actually pretty good. She said she was sorry for not believing me and for defending Haley's actions. She said she could see now that canceling the honeymoon was a reasonable consequence. But then the email changed direction. She started explaining why Haley's behavior wasn't really her fault. She brought up things from Haley's childhood like being bullied in middle school and struggling with insecurity. She said Haley always felt like she was in my shadow because I was successful and put together. She said Haley acted out because she needed attention and validation. By the end of the email, she was basically saying Haley's assault of Ryan and the false accusation were symptoms of deeper issues that deserved compassion rather than punishment. I read the whole thing twice, then closed my laptop. I didn't respond because I was tired of the excuses. Ryan asked what was wrong, and I showed him the email. He read it and shook his head. He said my mom would probably never fully get it. 2 days later, Ryan and I had our first couples counseling appointment. We'd scheduled it the week before to process everything that happened. The therapist was a woman in her 40s named Dr. Anderson. She had us sit on a comfortable couch in her office while she took notes. I explained the whole situation starting with the engagement party. Ryan added details about how violated he felt and how the false accusation made him afraid to leave the house for days. Dr. Anderson listened without interrupting. When we finished, she said what happened to Ryan was sexual assault, and the false accusation was a form of abuse. She said it was completely reasonable for us to set boundaries with my family to protect ourselves. She asked what kind of boundaries we wanted to establish going forward. Ryan said he didn't want to be around Haley at all until she took real accountability. I said I needed my parents to stop making excuses for her behavior. Dr. Anderson helped us write down specific boundaries we could communicate to my family. She said boundaries aren't about punishing people, but about protecting ourselves from harm. She validated that we had every right to limit contact with family members who refused to respect those boundaries. By the end of the session, I felt lighter somehow. Having a professional confirm that our reactions were normal and healthy made me feel less guilty about the whole situation. Over the next few days, I felt like I could breathe again. Cassie called me on Thursday afternoon and said she had news about Keith. She ran into him at the grocery store near her apartment, and they talked for a few minutes in the produce section. He looked tired, but okay. Not like someone falling apart. He told her the whole situation with Haley was a blessing in disguise because he found out about her character before they actually got married. He said he was focusing on growing his supplement business and just moving forward with his life. Cassie said he seemed relieved more than anything else, like he dodged something bad. I felt weird hearing that. Kind of sad for Keith, but also glad he got out before things got worse. 3 weeks after the mediation session, my phone buzzed with a text from Haley. I stared at her name on my screen for a solid minute before opening it. The message said she'd been going to therapy like the mediator suggested, and she was starting to understand why what she did was wrong. She said she wanted to talk to me when I was ready. I set my phone down and walked away from it. Ryan asked if I was okay, and I told him Haley texted. He nodded but didn't push me to respond. I spent the whole evening thinking about whether I wanted to engage with her at all. The next morning, I called Nora and asked what she thought I should do. She told me I was under no obligation to accept an apology or reconcile on any timeline except my own. She said I could respond or not respond, and either choice was valid. I thanked her and hung up feeling less pressured. 2 days later, another text came from Haley. She said she understood if I needed space, but she wanted me to know she posted a real apology on Facebook, taking full responsibility for her actions and the false accusation. I opened Facebook on my laptop and searched for her profile. The post was right there at the top, posted 6 hours earlier. I read it 3 times to make sure I was seeing it correctly. She admitted she sexually assaulted Ryan at her engagement party. She said she lied about him attacking her because she didn't want to face what she'd done. She wrote that she tried to destroy his reputation to avoid being accountable. She apologized to both of us publicly and said she was getting professional help. The post had over 100 comments, most of them shocked or supportive of her honesty. I screenshot the whole thing and texted it to Ryan. He read it while standing in our kitchen, and his face went through about 5 different emotions. I asked him how he felt about it. He said it was a good start, but he wasn't ready to have a relationship with Haley again. He told me he needed me to respect that boundary, even if I eventually decided to forgive her. I promised him I would. Dad called me that evening, and his voice sounded different, lighter somehow. He said he was proud of how I handled everything with Haley and the family situation. Then he told me something that surprised me. He and Mom were going to marriage counseling because this whole thing revealed problems in how they parent and communicate. He said Mom was resistant at first, but she agreed to try. I told him I was glad they were working on things. He said he loved me and hung up. A month after Haley posted her apology, I agreed to meet her alone at a coffee shop downtown. I got there first and ordered a tea, sat at a corner table facing the door. When Haley walked in, she looked completely different. She wore less makeup than usual, just some mascara and lip gloss. Her clothes were simple, jeans and a plain sweater instead of her usual flashy outfits. She sat down across from me and immediately started apologizing again without making any excuses. Her voice was quiet, and she kept eye contact the whole time. She told me she'd been diagnosed with alcohol use disorder and was attending meetings 3 times a week. She said getting drunk wasn't an excuse for what she did to Ryan, but she was working on the underlying issues that made her act so recklessly. She talked about how she always felt like she was competing with me and never measured up, so she acted out to get attention. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I told her I appreciated her apology and her efforts to change. I said rebuilding trust would take a long time, maybe years. She nodded and said she understood completely. She told me she didn't expect me to forgive her quickly or include her in my life right now. She just wanted me to know she was doing the work, and she was genuinely sorry. I left the coffee shop feeling cautiously hopeful, but not ready to make any promises about our relationship. That evening, Ryan asked me how it went, and I told him Haley seemed different, more aware of what she'd done, but I wasn't sure yet if the changes would stick. He nodded and said he appreciated me being honest about where things stood. A few days later, I called Haley and told her I was willing to try supervised family dinners once a month if she stayed sober and committed to therapy. She agreed immediately and thanked me for giving her a chance. I made it clear that Ryan might never be comfortable around her again, and she needed to respect whatever boundaries we set. She said she understood completely and wouldn't push for more than I was willing to give. The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes and felt surprisingly calm. 2 weeks after that, I got a text from Keith. He said he saw Haley's Facebook apology and heard from mutual friends that she was going to therapy and AA meetings. He told me he wasn't getting back together with her because too much had happened and he'd lost trust, but he was glad she was finally getting help and hoped she stuck with it. I texted back that I hoped so too and thanked him for reaching out. He sent one more message saying he was moving to a different city for a job opportunity and wished Ryan and me the best with our wedding. I showed Ryan the texts, and he seemed relieved that Keith was moving forward with his life. The next morning, Mom called me, and I almost didn't answer because I wasn't ready for another fight. But when I picked up, she was crying. Really crying. Not the angry, defensive tears from before. She apologized without any excuses or qualifications. She said she'd been thinking about everything that happened and realized she enabled Haley's worst behaviors for years while expecting me to be perfect and responsible. She admitted it wasn't fair to either of us and that she made me feel like I had to earn love by being good, while Haley got unconditional acceptance no matter what she did. I sat down on my couch because I wasn't expecting this. I told her I appreciated the apology and that I knew changing family patterns was hard. She said she and Dad were still going to counseling and learning a lot about themselves as parents. We talked for maybe 20 minutes, and when we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in months. The first family dinner happened 3 weeks later at my parents' house. Ryan and I drove over together and went through our boundaries one more time in the car. No alcohol would be served. Haley needed to stay sober, and we'd leave immediately if anyone got hostile or defensive. Dad answered the door and hugged us both, which felt genuine and warm. Mom was in the kitchen and came out to greet us with tears in her eyes, but a real smile. Haley arrived 10 minutes after us and looked nervous, staying near the doorway until I nodded at her. We all sat down for dinner and the conversation was awkward but peaceful. Dad asked Ryan about his job and Mom talked about a book she was reading. Haley stayed quiet mostly, answering questions when asked, but not trying to dominate the conversation like she used to. We ate roast chicken and vegetables and nobody brought up the engagement party or the lawsuit threat or any of the drama. When Ryan and I left 2 hours later, I felt exhausted, but okay. Over the next 2 months, the family dinners got gradually easier. Haley showed up on time every month and stayed sober, sometimes bringing sparkling water for herself without anyone having to remind her. She talked about her AA meetings casually, mentioning things she was learning about herself and her triggers. Mom and Dad seemed more relaxed too, less defensive and more willing to listen. At the third dinner, Haley asked Ryan a question about his work, and he answered politely, and I noticed his shoulders weren't as tense as they'd been at previous dinners. By the fourth dinner, he was making jokes with Dad and helping Mom clear dishes, acting more like himself. He stayed cordial with Haley but kept emotional distance, and she respected that without trying to force closeness or make things weird. Ryan told me after the fifth dinner that he was starting to relax around my family again because he could see consistent changed behavior instead of empty promises. He said Haley seemed genuinely different, quieter, and more thoughtful, and he appreciated that she wasn't trying to hug him or act like everything was fine between them. I asked if he'd ever be comfortable being friends with her, and he said honestly he didn't know. Maybe someday, but not anytime soon. I told him that was completely fair, and I'd never push him to forgive her faster than he was ready. 6 weeks after our last family dinner, I met Haley for coffee one-on-one at the same place we'd met before. She looked even more different from last time, wearing minimal makeup and simple clothes, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She told me she'd been promoted to assistant manager at her retail job and was actually enjoying the responsibility. She said having structure and accountability at work helped her stay focused and gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. She talked about training new employees and managing schedules, sounding proud of herself in a way that seemed genuine rather than boastful. I told her I was happy for her and meant it. Toward the end of our coffee, Haley asked if she could come to my wedding when Ryan and I eventually got married. Her voice was careful, and she looked down at her cup while asking. I took a breath and told her honestly that I didn't know yet, but I was open to the possibility if she continued making progress. I explained that a lot would depend on where things stood in 6 months, and whether Ryan felt comfortable having her there. She nodded and said she understood, that she knew she'd broken my trust badly, and it would take time to rebuild it. She thanked me for not shutting the door completely, and said she'd keep working on herself regardless of whether she got an invitation. A week later, Dad called and asked if he could stop by my apartment to talk. He came over that evening and sat at my kitchen table looking older and more tired than usual. He told me he was amazed by the changes in Haley, and grateful that I held firm on boundaries instead of enabling her like he and Mom had done for years. He said watching me stand up for myself taught him to be a better parent, and made him realize how much damage they'd done by treating us so differently. He apologized for not protecting me better when Haley crossed the line with Ryan, and for initially siding with Mom when she defended Haley's behavior. I told him I appreciated the apology and was glad he was working on changing. We talked for over an hour about family patterns, and how hard it is to break cycles you didn't even realize you were in. That weekend, Ryan and I started seriously planning our wedding for next spring. We sat on our couch with a notebook and talked about what we wanted, and we both agreed immediately that we wanted something small and intimate, with only people who truly supported our relationship. Ryan said he didn't want a big production or anyone there out of obligation. I suggested maybe 50 people maximum, close friends and family members who'd actually shown up for us during the hard times. We made a rough guest list, and I left a blank space where Haley's name would go, telling Ryan we'd decide about her invitation in 6 months based on whether she maintained her progress. He squeezed my hand and said that sounded fair. A week later, Mom texted asking if I wanted to have lunch with her, just the two of us. I met her at a small cafe near her office and felt surprised when she hugged me without the usual tension in her shoulders. We ordered sandwiches and talked about normal things for the first few minutes, work and the weather, and a book she was reading. Then she set down her fork and told me her therapist had been helping her understand something important. She said she'd spent years projecting her own fears onto me and Haley in completely different ways, expecting me to be perfect because she was terrified of failure, and excusing Haley's behavior because she wished she'd been braver when she was young. I listened as she explained how unfair that was to both of us, how it made me feel like love was conditional, and taught Haley that actions didn't have consequences. She looked tired but peaceful when she said it, like admitting this out loud lifted something heavy off her chest. I told her I appreciated her being honest and working on it. We finished lunch talking about my wedding plans, and she offered to help with flowers without trying to take over, which felt like a small miracle. 2 weeks after that, Cassie showed up at my apartment on a Saturday afternoon and told me to get dressed because we were going out. I followed her to a small event space downtown and walked in to find 30 of my actual friends waiting with champagne and decorations. Ryan was already there grinning, and I realized he'd been in on it the whole time. Cassie had organized a surprise engagement party with only people who genuinely supported us. No family drama or obligation invites. We spent the evening eating good food and laughing at toasts from friends who told embarrassing stories about me and Ryan. He pulled me onto the makeshift dance floor and we swayed together while everyone cheered, and I felt purely happy for the first time in months. No one brought up Haley or the lawsuit or any of the chaos. It was just us celebrating our relationship the way it should have been celebrated from the start. 4 months after everything exploded, my family gathered at my parents' house for Dad's birthday dinner. Haley arrived on time carrying a wrapped gift and looking calm in simple jeans and a sweater. She'd brought Dad a book about woodworking that he'd mentioned wanting months ago, which meant she'd actually been paying attention to someone besides herself. During dinner, she asked genuine questions about Ryan's work and my wedding planning without making it about her own failed engagement. She told a funny story about a customer at her retail job and everyone laughed, but it was the kind of story that showed growth and self-awareness rather than just being wild for attention. I watched her help Mom clear plates and noticed how she moved through the kitchen with purpose instead of dramatic flair. Later, when we were standing by the coffee maker, she thanked me quietly for not giving up on her completely. I told her I was proud of the work she was doing and meant it. She smiled and said she was proud of herself too, which was something I'd never heard her say before. Ryan and I drove home that night with the windows cracked and cool air flowing through the car. He reached over and took my hand, lacing our fingers together on the center console. He told me he was proud of how I handled everything, protecting us while still leaving room for people to heal and change. I squeezed his hand and stared out at the streetlights passing by, thinking about how terrified I'd been that setting boundaries would destroy my family forever. But the opposite happened. Forcing everyone to be honest and face consequences made us all better, made us actually deal with problems instead of sweeping them under rugs and pretending everything was fine. Haley was becoming someone real instead of performing chaos. Mom was learning to see us as separate people. Dad was stepping up as an actual parent. And Ryan and I were building a life together without constant family emergencies pulling us under. The boundaries didn't break us. They saved us by making everyone choose honesty over comfort, and that was worth every hard conversation and sleepless night.